Penelope Fletcher wasn't just excited, she was absolutely electrified as she stood at the starting line of the city's annual marathon. She was a petite woman with springy curls that bounced whenever she moved, and her eyes flashed with a kind of harmless mischief. Everyone else near her was swinging their arms, stretching their calves, and taking deep, focused breaths before the race. Penelope did some quick calf stretches too, but her attention quickly roamed across the crowd that stretched beyond the protective barriers. She could see men, women, and children full of excited anticipation, waiting to watch the runners shuffle by. Every face whispered potential conversation. The tension in Penelope's limbs was not from nerves. It was from trying to contain the dizzying desire to greet every single human waiting along the route. The starter pistol cracked through the early morning air, and the runners sprang forward. Penelope, so set on giving it her best, started at a reasonable pace. She had trained for endurance and believed she could handle the 26.2 miles. She got out in front of several runners initially, her strides smooth and confident, arms pumping comfortably. That confidence, however, wavered a tiny bit when she noticed a bunch of little kids waving bright red balloons on the right side of the road. In that moment, she felt a gravitational pull, an inexorable urge to drift their way. After all, how could you just run past those adorable faces without saying something? Within a few hundred yards of the starting line, before sweat even had a chance to properly bead on her forehead, Penelope slowed down. She glided toward the curb where a cluster of kids stood, all wide-eyed. "Hello there," she exclaimed, voice brimming with cheer. The kids giggled, offering shy waves. She pointed at the balloons. "Is today someone's birthday, or are those just for the race?" One little boy wearing a baseball cap shouted, "It's my brother's birthday." Penelope's eyes widened, and she began serenading the group with an impromptu birthday jingle. It was a short tune, only 3 lines, but it earned an outburst of laughter from the young spectators. By the time she finished, at least 20 runners had already overtaken her. Penelope, impervious to the typical runner's panic about placement, just waved goodbye and resumed her jog. But she hadn't even made it 100 yards further before she saw something else that piqued her curiosity. A man dressed head to toe in an oversized banana costume, vigorously cheering from the sideline. Despite all her best resolutions to keep moving, Penelope slowed in front of the banana man. "Excuse me, sir," she said breathlessly. "Is there a story behind this ensemble?" He grinned, a little startled she was addressing him at all, and happily explained he ran a fruit smoothie stand and wanted to promote healthy lifestyles. Penelope nodded vigorously. "Fruits are vital, absolutely vital," she declared with exaggerated solemnity. She then launched into a story about the time she tried to use bananas to bake bread, but ended up with a fiasco the color of pond scum. The conversation, initially about bananas, veered into her grandma's orchard, then to her grandma's recipe for apple pies, and might have continued indefinitely had the man not pointed out she was still in the middle of a marathon. With a gasp and a quick farewell, Penelope tore away once more, further behind now in the pack of athletes. As the morning progressed, Penelope found it nearly impossible to ignore the beckoning calls of the crowd. Every couple of minutes, she would hear someone shout random encouragement like, "You've got this," or "Looking good, keep going." Every one of those lines, in her mind, was a personal invitation to strike up a conversation. She chatted with a grandmother, enthusiastically waving a foam finger. She swapped stories with a local band that had set up a small stage to energize the runners. She even paused to tell an enthusiastic dog dressed in a little race t-shirt that he was absolutely adorable, though the dog merely wagged its tail, more interested in the treats in its human's pocket. Meanwhile, the other runners stocked up on water at the designated water stations and panted their way through the route as best as they could. From time to time, some of them would notice Penelope off to the side mid-conversation with a complete stranger, hands waving animatedly as if she'd known them for years. A few shook their heads, perplexed at how someone could be that chatty while running 26 miles. Others, curious or amused, waved at her in passing. At times, Penelope would wave back, calling out, "I'll catch up with you soon." only to be drawn into another discussion the moment she heard someone else holler, "Great job, runners!" By mile 5, Penelope's respectable time had withered, and she wasn't even sure how long she'd been on her feet. She couldn't quite calculate it because every time she tried to check her stopwatch, she found herself asking someone about the local coffee shops or how they liked living in that particular neighborhood. Her legs still felt strong, albeit a tad neglected from all the standstill chatter. The most rigorous portion of her day so far had been the excitement and laughter that made her heart flutter with uncontainable glee. Her coach, who had come to cheer her on, was perched near a big sign that read, "Keep going, Penelope." He was tapping his foot impatiently. The moment he spotted her, he shouted, "No time for small talk. Keep it moving." She nodded, waving, but then got distracted by a teenager who wanted to interview a passing runner for the school paper. Naturally, Penelope volunteered to be interviewed on the spot, happily enunciating each word as if it were the most momentous statement in sports history. At one point, as Penelope meandered onward, she came upon an older gentleman playing a trumpet. His jazz riffs wafted through the air, a vibrant, upbeat tune that made her hips involuntarily shimmy. Instead of running by with a grin or thumbs up as most runners did, Penelope pulled a little sidestep jig, clapped her hands, and asked, "Do you take requests?" The man laughed, momentarily stunned to be singled out by a runner mid-marathon. "Sure," he managed. "Know any pop songs?" Penelope asked, eyes shining. The trumpet player, painting the air with bright notes, launched into a slightly offbeat version of a famous pop tune. Penelope, for her part, danced around for about 30 seconds, totally ignoring the fact that her competition was now hopelessly distant. She clapped like the trumpet man was giving a once-in-a-lifetime performance. If a passing cyclist hadn't reminded her, "Hey, the rest of the marathon is that way, love," she might have stayed for an encore. She thanked the trumpeter and ran off with a flutter in her step. Amid these frequent social sojourns, Penelope occasionally caught up with the same group of runners in the rear pack, only to disappear again for another pit stop chat. A handful of them started calling her Chatty P or the social sprinter. Each time she reappeared among them, usually with some lively remark like, "I just had the most fascinating conversation about artisanal cheese," they'd greet her with good-natured ribbing. "You're missing your calling," one teased. "Are you here to run or to host a talk show?" she asked with an easy grin. Penelope shrugged and said, "Who says I can't do both?" In the city's quaint downtown area, around mile 10, the streets were lined with shops and restaurants. This spot naturally drew a convivial crowd, and it turned out to be the perfect environment for Penelope's appetite for gab. As soon as she entered the stretch, she saw an open-air cafe whose patrons were clapping politely for the marathoners. She was close to forging onward, truly she was. But then she overheard a woman exclaim, "These scones are divine!" And that simple statement carried on the breeze was enough. Penelope slowed her trot and hopped onto the sidewalk. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, slapping a hand over her chest as if contrite, "but did you say these scones are divine? What's the texture like, crumbly or moist?" The cafe patrons burst out laughing. However, the moment they started describing the scone's buttery crumb and the jam's perfect sweetness, Penelope sank into a chair as if invited to stay. She didn't actually bite into a scone. She did have some boundary between chatting and full-blown feasting, but she peppered them with endless questions. Had they tried all the flavors? Did the cafe also serve croissants? Was the coffee as good as the scones? She might have continued peppering them with inquiries had a passing volunteer not gently tapped her on the shoulder to remind her to keep the course clear. At last, after a dozen more spontaneous chats and side conversations, Penelope made it to the halfway mark of the marathon. By then, an official on a bicycle approached her, cautioning that the roads would start reopening soon, so if she wanted to continue, she needed to maintain some semblance of forward momentum. She nodded respectfully, promising the official she would stay focused. She truly intended to do, so she liked finishing what she started, after all. But it was only another mile before she ran into a crowd of costumed fans. They were dressed like cartoon characters, complete with oversized foam heads and elaborate props. "This is incredible," she cried, jogging a circle around them. "Are you guys part of a cosplay group, or is this just for the marathon?" One of the costumed fans joked that they had gotten lost on the way to an anime convention. Penelope burst into laughter, clapping loudly. Before she knew it, she was posing for pictures, dramatically hugging someone dressed as a giant purple cat, and complimenting the intricacy of the costumes. Time marched on without her. While other runners sank deeper into the difficulties of the marathon, tightening muscles, sweaty faces, the friction of shoes rubbing raw spots, Penelope remained buoyant, fueled by the energy of 1,000 meet and greets. Once or twice, she acknowledged how far behind she had fallen, but each time, she told herself, I'll just make up the time after this conversation. Naturally, by the time the conversation ended, she found another conversation waiting. She never lost her good humor or her surprising pep. In fact, if anything, the comedic joy of talking to people made her feel less tired than she really was. She was the only runner around who seemed to be enjoying a side of comedic relief with her marathon. Around mile 17, she saw a group of senior citizens sitting in foldable lawn chairs, crocheting scarves as they observed the slow, trickling wave of runners pass by. They called out words of encouragement to her, and she, of course, stopped. What are you making? She asked. An elderly woman held up a half-finished neon green scarf. We're crocheting goodies for the local homeless shelter, the woman explained. Penelope's eyes instantly sparkled with admiration. That's wonderful, she said. Do you teach classes? I've always wanted to learn how to crochet. Moments later, she was receiving a quick crash course in single crochet stitch right on the side of the road. The ladies cheered as she fumbled with the hook and yarn, dropping loops and unraveling them repeatedly. Penelope laughed at how helpless she felt, trying to do more than run. Warmth emanated from the group, and she nearly forgot there was a race still winding its way through the city. Eventually, she realized how empty the street behind her looked. Everyone else was miles ahead, and even some stragglers had begun power walking past her. Oh dear, she gasped as she handed back the crochet hook. I'd better get going before the finish line packs up and heads home. With swift thanks and a final round of hugs, she dashed back onto the course. By mile 20, the fatigue finally hit. She felt twinges in her calves and a light ache in her lower back. Yet she refused to let physical discomfort sour her mood. Aware that she still had more than 6 miles left, she decided to ration her stops a bit more carefully, perhaps only stopping when the onlookers really needed a chat, rather than pouncing on every opportunity. This was easier said than done, but she managed for almost 2 whole minutes, breezing by 2 or 3 spectators without more than a friendly wave. Then she spotted a flamboyant pair of synchronized dancers, apparently hired to entertain the crowd in one of the city squares. The dancers performed in sparkly costumes with feathered headpieces. Well, that was something Penelope couldn't simply pass by with a wave. She screeched to a halt like a child enthralled by a circus act. You two are mesmerizing, she cried, jogging in place. They twirled and bowed, smiling at the compliment. We're here to keep everyone's spirits up, one dancer said, tossing her feathers to the side dramatically. Mission accomplished, Penelope replied, gazing at them with an appreciative grin. Before she realized it, she had joined them for a short, improvised dance step that led into her giving them a flurried round of applause. She parted ways with them, feeling re-energized, albeit further behind than ever. As if that episode weren't enough, about half a mile later, she saw a local newscaster filming a segment on the marathon. A bright camera light practically beckoned her from the roadside. She remembered how she once aspired to be a reporter before dedicating herself to running, and a tiny flicker of that dream rekindled. She drifted over, unmindful of the clock ticking away. The flustered newscaster moaned, We can't find a runner willing to talk on camera. They're all too focused. Penelope beamed ear to ear. I'll talk to you, she volunteered. The newscaster nearly jumped out of her skin. Really? We only need a quick soundbite about how the race is going, Penelope laughed. A quick soundbite is one of my specialties, she joked. The camera started rolling, and Penelope launched into an enthusiastic play-by-play of her day. Minus the fact she'd spent half of it chatting, crocheting, dancing, and sampling scone descriptions. If the newscaster was surprised by her endless anecdotal tangents, she did a good job hiding it. Eventually they wrapped up, The newscaster thanked her with a dazed smile, and Penelope resumed her meandering run. She came upon mile 23 by mid-afternoon, well past the point when the most serious runners had already finished. Some even had time to go home, shower, and come back to watch the stragglers. Penelope noticed the shifting energy in the crowd, a little calmer, less frenzied, as if the main event had already come and gone. Nevertheless, plenty of supportive folks remained on the sidelines, cheering for every last runner. They offered kindly applause, a few lumps of encouragement, and almost all wore that perplexed but admiring expression. Who is this woman, still smiling after so many hours? As Penelope jogged those last 3 miles, she spotted her coach again, arms folded, eyebrows arched, and a grin curling at the corners of his mouth despite the exasperation in his eyes. "You managed to turn a marathon into an all-day scavenger hunt," he teased, stepping into a slow backward jog next to her. Technically, he wasn't supposed to run on the course, but the crowd had thinned so much that no one protested. "I might have set a record," she admitted sheepishly, "for most words spoken during a marathon. I'm sure I burned more calories talking than running." He rolled his eyes in playful scorn. "You're definitely going to have to work off the public relations high after this," he said. "But come on, let's finish this thing, eyes on the prize." Taking that as a motivating cue, Penelope forced herself not to stop and chat again, though she still waved zealously at everyone. It was surprising how, even with all her dawdling, she was still able to jog. Those weeks of training had gifted her enough endurance to keep moving, albeit at a modest pace. The city's marathon organizers had not yet dismantled the finish line. Instead, they'd begun the slow process of clearing away barricades and signage. A few volunteers stood guard, just in case. When Penelope finally crested the final stretch, the scattered, remaining spectators gave a stirring cheer. They might have numbered only a handful, but they clapped as if she were the first-place finisher. Their claps echoed softly between tall buildings, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the pavement. Penelope grinned so widely that her cheeks hurt. She spotted the official timer. The numbers displayed were far from a personal best, or even a typical finishing time. But none of that mattered. She approached the finish line like it was her personal red carpet moment. In those last few feet, she paused to blow kisses to the handful of fans who had stuck around and cheered for an eternity. Then, with her arms spread wide, she crossed the threshold. A small group of volunteers handed her a finisher's medal, one of the only few left. One volunteer quipped, "We were about to go home, but we guessed you'd show eventually." Penelope graciously accepted the medal and thanked them. She bent over, hands on her knees, letting out a long, dramatic sigh. A random observer nearby, curious, asked if she was exhausted. Penelope shook her head, still panting. "I'm not so much exhausted as I am bursting with stories to share. You all have no idea the amazing folks I met today." As if on cue, a few of the spectators came over to congratulate her. The crocheting grandmother, still wearing big smiles, pressed a small scarf into her hands and said, "We told you we'd finish one for you by the end." She draped it around her neck. The banana costume man came by, brandishing a sample smoothie. A couple from the cafe strolled up, practically squealing, "We're saving you a scone if you want one on the house." Even the newscaster ran up, camera still rolling, wanting a final quote. And Penelope, in her typical style, talked to them all at once. Hugging, exclaiming, laughing. For her, finishing the run wasn't truly the end. It merely opened yet another opportunity to keep talking. In the grand scheme of marathons, Penelope's performance would not be emblazoned in record books. She didn't set a world record for speed or even a personal best, but she had, in her own accidental way, spread cheer throughout the course. To those who watched her or chatted with her, she was a testament that sometimes endurance is only part of the marathon experience. Connection with others, camaraderie, and plain old silliness can be just as memorable as crossing the line in blazing time. By late afternoon, after soaking in one more animated round of conversation, Penelope finally shuffled to the car with her coach. He teased her every step of the way, claiming she'd even chat up the traffic lights if they had personality. She didn't deny it. Instead, she smiled in that unabashed way that hinted she was already dreaming of next year's run. Sure, she'd probably plan to go faster, be more disciplined, maybe limit her side chat somewhat, but even in the midst of that, she knew she could never pass by a friendly face without at least saying hello. Long after the day's excitement receded, with the roads reopened and the city returning to normal, people across the route swapped stories about that lady who wouldn't stop talking. Some found it downright bizarre, others found it encouraging. A few found it hilarious. But if they knew Penelope, and many felt they almost did after just a few minutes of conversation, they would all agree that her willingness to connect made the marathon more entertaining. In an odd way, she became something of a legend in the local running sphere, celebrated for her unstoppable chatter rather than her speed. "Someday I'll sign up again," she told her coach on the drive home, yawning yet giggly. "Next time I'll run faster, maybe." And to that, the coach only smiled, certain that despite any declarations, Penelope would remain the chattiest runner to ever grace a marathon course.